Hello and welcome to Synthesized Sunsets. Today it's just me, Kevin, without Gordon, but I have a special guest on today, which is Visakan Veerasamy, who is an internet theorist and prolific internet poster who writes about the importance of vibrant creative scenes and the potential of the internet to facilitate their formation. He is known for his intricate Twitter threads, which often loop back on themselves and connect together in surprising ways. So, Visa, I have been following your ideas for a long time, and I think something that I often run into, which I think is partially by design, is that it's very difficult to convey the general scope of your ideas to someone else, especially if they're not particularly online. And I think the way that I usually do that is I usually send them a link to the 50-year plan for a global nerd network. So I was wondering if you could give a little bit of an overview of what that is and the inspiration for it and how it connects to your overall philosophy.
Hi. Interesting. So, I've always been very online from the beginning since I was a kid, and even before I discovered the internet, I was very bookish. I love reading books, and I love reading a lot of books at the same time. So I feel like I was always very hyper texty, if that makes sense. More so than liking any particular book, I like all books at the same, like many books in concert. Like I love the experience of that. And growing up watching TV and having access to different media from different parts of the world, so like anime in Japan and like Bollywood films in India and Hollywood in the US and local TV in Singapore. And so I've always just been very surfing all the channels at once. uh that's like the tagline that came for me for my Substack. And it's not just a aesthetic thing, it's like a way of being, I would say. And the thing I always wanted was like kind of insight into the process, insight into how the sausage is made and so on. And I didn't get much of that back in the day. So these days you do see more of it. Like there are more people making, like YouTube videos and TikToks of like how I do the thing. And that there's a whole separate thing to get into about like how that is performed. But yeah, like I just am curious and I want to see things and know things. And uh the internet is just a very natural medium for me. And so you asked about the 50-year nerd network, and
Mhm.
um that when I was about 17, 18, 19, I was very frustrated with how limited my social circle was. I liked my friends, but I felt like very few people, even in my own friend groups, shared the same interests to the same degree. And there was a bit of a whiplash, or a bit of a, I guess, like a contrast between the people in my life who are very much focused on, oh, you got to go to school, you got to get a job, you got to get married, have kids, live this kind of decent ordinary life. And then there were the visions from fiction and this grand thoughts and ideas and awareness of the greater world that we live in outside of. I'm from Singapore, so it's like a tiny island, and you're very, very, very conscious of the fact that you live on a tiny island, and there's such a big world outside, and I hadn't seen much of it directly. And so I wrote, I was blogging a lot, so I wanted to have friends. Like I knew that the internet was a place that anyone could publish anything and get in contact with anybody else. And so I wanted to make contact with people that I had not met yet who shared my interests. And so blogging was my way of trying to do that. And it did succeed to some degree. Uh, yeah, there's just like some backstory, I guess. And I I never lost that sense of wanting to find other people like myself, especially because I felt so like disenfranchised and lonely. And for what? Like what's the sin of being a curious person? There isn't. It's just kind of unfortunate if you don't have people in your life who recognize your traits and what you need to flourish. And so I was just very determined to find the others. And the internet allows you to do that, and I could feel it even before it happened for me. So I was and I felt like it's just math in the sense of if you talk to someone, if you talk to 3 or 4 people every day, like you go online and you look for people to comment on or whatever, and you post what you really believe, even if it's like 1 in 1,000 people who get it, you can eventually find them. And then once you found them, you probably find their friends and you so on. And I did that and it worked. And so a bunch of experiments like that, like posting online, learning to get better at talking, at transmitting ideas in text, which I think a lot of people are not actually very good at. Like there's a lot of conflict in the world, like interpersonal conflict in the world that stems from people not knowing how to send text well and how to read text as well. Like it's a kind of literacy problem that that's one of the things I'm currently working on, like writing about. But yeah, so I did a bunch of experiments to find belonging for myself as a nerd, to find self-actualization for myself as a nerd. I think I succeeded for myself, and my goal has been to find and help other people like myself. And the idea is that as you find these kind of isolated individuals who are curious, passionate, uh, all of those, like kind of want to do things, want to try things. If you network all of these people together, then the collection of people will be very valuable to each other, more valuable than any of them would be to their immediate social environments on their own if they haven't yet learned how to like interface with other people and so on. And that's just like one of my life dreams, I guess, that it's just I have such a clear vision for it, and it seems so obvious to me that it should already be done, and it's not done yet to a degree that I would be happy with. And I just think any random nerd from any part of the world, from like Guadalajara or Rio or Azerbaijan or just somewhere in the world, if you're a nerd about something, you should be able to find and connect with other nerds about same things, and you should be able to make friends and have kinship and have a meaningful life, right? And it's kind of true, but it's not. It's still difficult to a degree that I feel like it shouldn't have to be. So, and I have like a long the plan. There's like this Domino's meme that I made. It was actually funny thing about the Domino's meme. It was I initially made it in a negative way to describe how things get worse. So it used to be like the smallest domino is like, someone does something terrible, and then someone else or some group of people try to prevent terrible things from happening in the future. And the next domino is so they introduce a culture of kind of fear and shame and don't do bad things, don't say bad things, don't get in trouble. And then the domino after that is, well, no one dares to try anything anymore. No one's curious anymore. So you lose imagination and creativity, and then you reach to like cultural stagnation and depression and whatever. And like that's a very bleak kind of model of things getting worse. And the moment I made that, I was like, I gotta I gotta articulate the alternative. And so the alternative is begin with love and curiosity as the smallest domino, and then from there you get people who embody that spirit. And so I wrote my first book, Friendly Ambitious Nerd, about that, which is like, how do you get a bunch of people to be curious and treat each other well and understand each other better and so on. And then from there, once you have a critical mass of those people, they can create wider social environments that regular people can participate in and still benefit from that. And so I call those scenes. And okay, the definition of a scene predates me. It's a different thing, but like I envision scenes that have a higher percentage of friendly ambitious nerds than other scenes, and that's my and kind of solution to the problem. So the problem is that if a scene is healthy and good, it inevitably attracts bad actors who want to exploit it. Or I mean, some are malicious. Some they like want to make money or they want to abuse people or whatever. And a lot of it is just people just are unskilled and they don't know how to act, and then they just make the place less fun. It's like imagine a bar that was cool and then it got popular and then now it's noisy and people bump into each other a lot and it's not fun anymore, and all the really cool people leave because they are always looking for the next cool thing, and so now the bar's kind of not fun anymore, and the people who are left are the people who don't realize that, and then so it just gets worse and worse. Same for any scene. And so if you want a scene to do well, you have to have a critical mass of people who know how to take care of it. And so like part of it is a training problem, like you got to train people to get better at it. Part of it is knowledge problem. You got to have enough people who understand all these dynamics, and so on. And then hop and skip. If we have enough of such scenes and they can create environments, if they can provide a context for more and more people to flourish, then hop and skip and it's golden age for humanity, right? Like if truly we can get even 1% of people everywhere to be more like pro-social and create solutions and or environments in which solutions can be created and so on, like that's just a better world. And yeah, and it's just I guess it's a very long-winded way of just talking about being deliberate about human flourishing fundamentally, like all of that. It's just how do we flourish as individuals and as communities and so on and so on. Yeah, I've been talking for a very long time. I hope that was makes sense. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I think that stripped of all of its nuance, the one of the core takeaways from your work is that people are remarkably unambitious in their social networks. If you really think about it, and I
Yeah.
think this is like more true to some people than others.
It's
But
most people, yeah.
for me, this really, or what I mean is like the truth of that statement is more or less obvious to others. Like I think for myself, I think this was sort of just more intuitively true for me because I remember I went through most of my childhood not really actively trying to make friends, like probably even less so than the average person does. And there was a certain point in high school where I really kind of got on, like I was always kind of online, but I really got on Facebook in earnest. Became a real face poster,
Yeah.
and I realized that there was potentially like tremendous alpha in just trying to hit up all these random people. And I was like, gosh, why doesn't anyone do this? Randomly message like a bunch of people and then not like that many of them would respond. But I mean, when they did, it was just really, really cool. And I remember when I went to college, I like started out by getting on this like roommate finding app and just spraying out a ton of messages. And there was only one message that really turned into like anything real, but that person ended up being one of my closest friends in college. And I was just, yeah, this is just something that can happen. But I think it's sort of harder to articulate the truth of this idea to some people than others because I think that if you don't already have one, it is sort of hard to construct a mental model of what a better social network could lead to. I guess it's not something super concrete like, oh, it can let you do this thing. I don't know. I think it's hard to transmit. Something that I am grateful for is that I actually encountered your ideas in kind of like in real life form, which is that I was at this I guess like commune camp something or other in Arizona, and there were like at this camp there were several mentor figures who were meant to kind of like I don't know, yeah, just like generically mentor the people there. And the mentor I got assigned was just, I guess, very well acquainted with your ideas, although I didn't know it at the time. It was just like kind of trying to live them. And so, but anyway, I remember he also kind of had this performance art thing going on where he would just like do these really aggressive public pro-social things, which were very hard to not notice because this is very tight community of like 60 people, and so it was really like quite effective performance art, and especially because he had these like individual mentor sessions with people, you could really start to see his ideas reverberate. I guess most people I think didn't really get it, but I feel like the people who did get it really got it. And so, I didn't know at the time. It took me a while to find my way to your ideas, but eventually I found his Twitter account and then I was like looking at his Twitter follows and I'm just like, okay, so this guy didn't come up with all these ideas by himself.
And then nobody does. Everything's
Yeah,
a
right, right,
remix.
right. Nobody does. But yeah, I wasn't really aware that this was connected to any sort of like broader philosophy. Like to me, it was just like Eric's weird
This
Eric
is
things. But then I ended up going down the whole like Visa rabbit hole. But yeah, I don't know. It's like it's very interesting when you meet someone who embodies some like internet philosophy in real life. You're just like, oh yeah, this is a thing. Like I think in my head, sort of like the world that I'm in cyberspace and the world I'm in the real world are sort of like different worlds. And I'm
oh
like the
yeah.
same person, but I'm like between. But then like yeah, when I meet someone who I'm just like, oh wait, like don't you belong, like don't you belong in cyberspace? I think the fact that it does feel surreal for that to happen just goes to show how bad society still is at harnessing cyberspace. We really still have this view of these two different worlds. Would you say that you ever meet people like in real life, not as a sort of not as part of like a sort of Twitter online meetup or something that just like
Oh yeah,
happen to be familiar? Okay, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, what has that been like? And like where?
When I randomly encounter someone who knows my stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean it's great. You know, it's validating in some ways. Like progress is being made if people know stuff without me having personally reached out to them in advance. It feels good. It feels like I have succeeded at least at like the. So I think in terms of dominoes and I think in terms of thresholds and so on. And there was a time where like no one was even listening to me, right? And so now people come to me. They come to me with, "Hey, aren't you that guy? I remember I like your this thing." And you were saying even like you went somewhere else and you talked to somebody and they happen to know. So these to me are signs and clues that like I've crossed a couple of the early thresholds, and it makes me. I mean, it's gratifying in some ways. It's also, I see it as a sign to get even more serious in a way. Like again, like when you don't yet have any real impact, real responsibility, like you're still operating in like hypotheticals. But once you
Mhm.
have like real influence, people start asking things like, "Oh, what should I do with my life? Should I do for a career?" You got to start being careful. You don't want to direct people in directions that they might regret, or and you don't. The tricky thing to be very careful of is people will, with good cheer and good spirit, come to you and ask you to make their decisions for them, and I think that's very dangerous, and we shouldn't do that. Like we should always encourage people to have their own sense of sovereignty, and people are very quick to try and, not everyone, but there's a cluster of people who are very quick to try and offload their sense of responsibility and sovereignty to other people, whether it's to politics or to fandom, or just something where you can say, I'm living my life because of that guy, like the way I'm doing things is because of that guy, and if things go bad, it's that guy's fault. Like I'm not culpable for my own life. That's very dangerous. And if you have people like that in a network, they can all like enable each other.
Mhm. Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. Like, people trying to imagine the future are often ridiculed at the start. The very earliest people writing science fiction, speculative fiction, I'm sure it seemed rather silly. It's like, why are you writing about this bird on Mars? Um,
Yeah,
but I think I'm going to make a very reductive statement. But I think that
sure.
there is a sense in which science fiction kind of had this thesis, which was
Mhm.
like engineering technician types imagining what the future was going to look like as a result of the upcoming technological changes. And then also in the 80s, or I guess the 70s and also the 80s, there was this antithesis, which was new wave, and people that were talking about, okay, we don't want to be so hyper focused on this like technology and the intricacies of engineering. We also need to consider the like human element. And there were a lot more stories that had like literary ambitions and were what some people called like inner space rather than outer space. And I think that this was definitely like a good course correction. I think a lot of these early science fiction stories just didn't have much humanity in them. But I think that the synthesis, I guess, has not really arrived yet in a satisfying way. I think that there are some rare authors. I would say Ursula K. Le Guin is probably the biggest example, who were able to kind of be speculative in like a technological way, in a sci-fi way about human relationships. Ursula K. Le Guin was very much interested in how like society would change at a really kind of soul level, considering these different conditions. She has this great story about a society where the gender ratio just happens to be like 12 to 1 and how that
Mhm.
impacts the dynamics.
Yeah,
But I feel like science fiction nowadays is very often just kind of character novels that is set in like space. Just
yeah,
like there
yeah.
is some kind of science fiction aesthetic, but it's mostly just a story about people that you want to hear, the kind of story that people have always gone to for entertainment. And I guess the sort of story that I would be really interested in seeing is really kind of technical exploration of how new technology could mediate social relationships. Like I think there's a lot of social dynamics that science fiction failed to prepare us for. The kind of like the enshittification of the internet, even like AI girlfriends to some extent, or like what AI slop would do, not just like to the world in a technological sense, but also to society and our relationships. And I think that part of the reason I wanted to have you on this pod is you strike me as someone who would actually be pretty well positioned to produce such fiction, actually, just based on your experience on the internet and your general life philosophy and your ambition. And you do write about fiction, science fiction every once in a while. There are some authors you like to shout out. So I guess something I would like to ask you is, have you ever considered writing science fiction? And if so, like why or why not? Or have you already?
So I've written some stuff. It's very sketchy. It's not really polished for public consumption. It's more like like character studies and environment studies. And again, because I think of my writing in a very long term scale, and I don't know if it's for the best. Like I would like to, like again, hypothetically, if I could polish stuff up and release it for public consumption, that would be nice, I guess. But like, there is a bit of a cost, like effort cost to translating my chaotic notes and drafts into stuff that's like palatable. And that is the work of writing. Like you think you have something, and then you look at it, and you're like, what do I need to change? And then you're writing, you're changing, editing, you're reorganizing, you're blah blah blah. But in like, I guess for me, I don't want to. The phrase that's coming to me is I try not to think in genres, which I don't know if it's true, but it feels kind of true. Like I've always been, again. So earlier I was saying something about like surfing all the channels at once. Like I admire how like Stanley Kubrick, for example. I think he made like at least seven great films in different genres. There's like sci-fi films, horror films, like all kinds of stuff. Western, probably, I think. And every genre is like a pattern of thinking or a way of seeing, and I have not yet like settled in on specific stories I want to tell. No, I mean I have some. And I guess I have things that I want to get out of the way first, probably before I try more speculative things. So I do have a memoir that I wrote, which is set in like it's semi autobiographical, semi fictional. It's set in 2000s Singapore music scene, and that's it's there's so much to get into even without speculating. Like just describing what happened, I feel is like there's a kind of service to be done there. Just describing the challenges of trying to make art and the challenges of cultural acceptance and like the transition from CDs to streaming and YouTube and stuff. Like there was something there that's interesting. And just I've been so in my fiction area, I've been so caught up with that's like one project. I have another project that's like something like Martian Chronicles from Ray Bradbury, but it's not sci-fi. It's like fantasy historical stuff. It's like ancient Southeast Asian / Indian alternate universe. Even then, it's not like speculation for the sake of thinking about how things could have been different. It's just I have thoughts. They don't correspond to literal history, so it's made up. So it's speculative in the sense that it's made up, and it's very like emotional um questions about. I mean, it's just a vehicle. I call that one like Project Purusha. So Purusha is like in Hinduism, it's like the early proto god that was like a proto being that was like ripped up to make the world or something. You can look that up. But so that's just it's like a sandbox for me to pull together all the like motifs and themes and little story snippets. Like a brother and a sister something something, and then like what like there's a story about siblings, and like what happens around it is whatever. Like I just wanted to write a story about siblings, and like many small sketches like that, and maybe some of them will. I could imagine that one of them has legs and really wants to keep going, and then I ended up building a story or like a bigger story around that. But I'm still like in the sketchy phase, and I feel almost like I have to get those two things out before I can start. Even right now, I feel like I had to say all those things before I could get to thinking about uh sci-fi or thinking about the future. I do have thoughts. I do have. I think if I were like tasked, if you're like, hey Visa, I'm gonna give you a grant like a $200,000, and like you just have to write and put a sci-fi thing on my desk by next year, right? I could do that. I could, and it would be almost certainly something to do with um alts on so on beginning with the premise like on Twitter, for example, that each person can run multiple accounts. I do.
Mhm.
I run multiple accounts. I know multiple people who run multiple accounts. Um, and so there are a few elements of our experience of reality as it is. You know, so I think was it William Gibson, I think, who said that the future is already here, just unevenly distributed. Right. So
Mhm.
there are a bunch of online nerds who run multiple accounts. I would have been a bit confused, I think, if you told me it depends on how you tell me, I guess. But like if you told me that, oh, we can destroy all your devices and you'll be fine actually, because like all your stuff is, I guess, in the cloud or whatever, right? And but then if you lose access to those things, it's like you lose parts of your mind, right? Even when like Twitter has like a service outage, it kind of hurts. So now I have an archive that's on I have a local archive and I have an archive on community archives, which my friends made, but even so, like those archives are not entirely up to date. Like we have to update them from time to time. And in between, if if there's a service outage or if I get suspended or something, I do feel like I lose parts of my brain that I kind of rely on having access to my thoughts that are on the cloud or behind some service provider. And that itself is so you take those premises, right? Like okay, you have alts, you have information that is yours that is not you don't control entirely, and then yeah, you start using those building blocks to ask like how can that what if you take that to more of an extreme, right? Because right now it's like a bunch of nerds mostly do that. Some people do it for some work and stuff, but what if more and more of our lives were like that? And now I'm randomly remembering from years ago during the Syrian refugee crisis, there were people for whom like their Facebook photographs were their most cherished possession because like of their family and friends and their homes. Like they had not they left with their smartphones basically. Like it was their most treasured possession as they were refugees, right? Which some people think, oh, like some people still have the mental model of, oh, if you're poor you can't afford a smartphone. Now in the world we live in already, it's like if you're poor you can't afford not to have a smartphone. And the
Yeah.
only people who really can afford to not have smartphones are people like Christopher Nolan, who has assistants who have smartphones. So he's like, I don't want to be distracted. That's because you have people as your human smartphones in a way. They are your assistants who tell you what your next schedule is going to be or who's going to meet you, whatever. But the rest of us, like, we kind of rely on these things for where are your opportunities, where are your jobs, like a farmer in rural India or whatever needs to know the price of something, they use mobile phones for that. And yeah, I haven't I guess if you want to write a story, you always start with some kind of conflict and tension, and you know I'm sure people have written about these things. Like, I'm not claiming that this is cutting edge futuristic stuff, but at the same time I look at stuff on TV. I haven't watched Severance yet, but like I look at the stuff on TV in recent years, and most of it feels like stuff we've already thought about, or
Right,
slightly more
exactly. I mean, so much of it is just adapted old stuff in the first place, right? Not to mention,
yeah,
but before you even get into how fresh it is. Um,
yeah, which makes sense in terms of the economics of high production value um
yeah,
content,
I mean, it's
right?
tried
So
and
so like
tested.
Yeah, so like Westworld, which I only care season 2 wasn't that good, I think. I stopped watching halfway in season 2. But Westworld season 1 was pretty great in terms of
Uh,
like wow, it's very high production. But the concept was decades old, and I mean I think it's already a movie from years ago, and they just made it more cool, but like visually stunning and music, and that's fine, that's great. And Cyberpunk the game
yeah.
2077, like it's
Uh-huh.
based on something from decades ago, and it's even like so I enjoyed the game generally as a story, and it includes there's some concepts that are to people who have never encountered the genre, like oh wow, you have like a AI in your head or whatever, like that
Yeah.
sounds it's new to some people, but it's very much it's built on the axioms of what the social reality was decades ago.
Right, right. I mean, that's kind of like an idea I've been talking about a lot. I think in some sense, the people who like were really foundational for sci-fi were like too successful because
Yeah.
like we haven't really been able to outgrow their paradigms. One of the moments I felt that like I found sci-fi wanting is that when I started talking to ChatGPT a lot. Um, and I realized that even though there is so much science fiction about artificial intelligence, like it's probably one of the most covered subjects, it pretty much just retreads the same stuff that Isaac Asimov was talking about in like the 1950s. And like, I don't think it really prepared us at all. Like we have all of this like literature about like and TV shows and movies about artificial intelligence, and for what? Like I personally feel like we're handling the integration of artificial intelligence in society like pretty badly. And like, isn't
Yes.
that one of the things society? Wasn't that one of the things science fiction is supposed to do? Like, it's supposed to help us prepare for this eventuality. And I just really couldn't recall any sort of popular science fiction that touched on these concepts. Like AI, slop, and like I'm sure they're out there, but these certainly weren't the things that were being spotlighted by like science fiction as a whole. And also, I just felt like even when I was first time that I really had a conversation in earnest with ChatGPT, I was just like, wow, like even me just in these initial minutes, I can imagine all of these like crazy ways that this could change the world. And I feel like I'm only scratching the tip of the iceberg, and I don't really know anyone who's writing about this. And I think that as the rollout of AI continues, I still kind of feel the same way. I think people are talking about imagining like a post AI future, but people aren't doing a whole lot of the imagining part. They're doing a lot of like the imagining, if that makes sense.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I
like,
mean, that's
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, I don't know. Like, I guess one thing I'm curious about is, do you think you saw the way that artificial intelligence would affect like our social relationships coming? Like, were you kind of
The
equally taken off guard as everyone else?
That's tricky because the mind is so good at like rewriting history. I can go back and look at things. I do remember I have tweets from like 2017-ish where I think at the time Google was doing some chatbot stuff that was getting kind of showing signs of promise of getting really good. And I was tweeting then like this is going to cause a lot of interesting funny trouble. And what I meant by that was like you know, it's not the most amazing conversationalist on earth. And this is 2017. It's not like top 0.1%, but it's better than the bottom 30% of people, right?
Oh,
And like that's gonna cause that in itself. If a chatbot can do better YouTube comments, right, or do better anything comments anywhere, any replies anywhere, better than the bottom half of people. What happens with the bottom half of people? You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, what do they like? Will they be able to get better? Like, okay, maybe the third quartile is challenged and inspired and supported to get better, but probably the bottom quartile is going to get like like really overwhelmed and like they're going to become left behind in some way, and like that will be a thing to deal with. And yeah, like that's a question to be explored and faced, and people probably don't even want to face it because it's uncomfortable in some
Yeah, I mean,
ways.
people are burying their head in the sand about artificial intelligence so much. It's kind of every time like ChatGPT or Dolly makes an advancement in art, people are just like, well, it'll still never be good in this way, and then it'll be good in that way, and I'm like, oh well, but it'll never be good in this way, and this is kind of the excuse to just shy away from the implications. But it's just like, yeah, what if it can like produce art that's more popular than 99.99% of people? We really have to reckon with these questions. I'm sort of curious, like, what is like what are the most novel things you have used AI for, especially as a creative?
So yeah, I'm not impressed with my own use. All of this is coinciding for me with me having a kid. So like my whole brain is kind of parent brain. I think where it's been strong for me is getting very quick overviews of any material anywhere, books or
Mhm.
whatever, and
I think that's the
then
most obvious use case. Yeah.
switching contexts very quickly. I mean, yeah, so there's a bunch of mundane stuff that I do, like help me clean up this YouTube transcript, help me sort this information by this direction, like whatever, like very kind of banal things. And then there's, yeah, tell me about this thing, tell me about that thing. I did have I have a Rome document that like accumulated from years of curiosities where I'm like, one day I'm gonna research the backstory of like the Hanseatic League in Europe or whatever, and that's like it would have been a research project that would have taken a long time, and now like I can ask ChatGPT or Claude or whatever to just answer the question, and like I'm not to say that I'm like perfectly satisfied with the answer, like, but I can then use that answer as the new baseline from which I do conduct further inquiry, like I verify that it's not hallucinating or whatever. But yeah, so those are useful. But I haven't yet like really. I can feel that I'm not using it to the fullest capacity yet.
I,
Like
I
this is.
I feel this so strongly in my soul. Like I feel like every time I use it, it kind of hurts me almost that I'm just like have this like godlike tool in my hands and I can't figure out like what I can do. Like I'm just like think harder. I think one question is, would you how often would you say that you interact with ChatGPT in the frame of ChatGPT being ChatGPT versus the frame of ChatGPT being a human? Do you always talk to ChatGPT in the sort of basic context, or are you just like, oh, pretend you are someone who is like this?
Mm, I mean, I think when I first started using it, I trying to see what I could make it do, right? So I'd say I'd be like, yeah, pretend to be so and so and having a conversation with so and so or whatever. But I haven't really had a need to do that in a while. So I've been mostly just using it for very just menial tasks for now. Right? But it's cool things like, here are the ingredients I have in my kitchen. What can I make? Right? Like that kind
Mhm,
of thing. Like those are I would say it's very procedural kind of
mhm,
thing. Like things you could potentially figure out by doing a bunch of googling and compare and contrast and like populating a spreadsheet or whatever. Like so those things it completely just dominates and wipes out like all the saves a ton of time. But yeah, I have not yet well, no, I might not be being fair to myself. Sometimes I'm working on something creative, like I'm
uh-huh,
writing something, and I would ask it the suggestions for things.
mhm.
And like a bunch of the suggestions might be weak, but sometimes it just gives uncannily good ones. I mean, I don't think it knows what's good and bad yet,
Yeah.
but like,
Yeah.
but it gives it's great at generating, and then you use your taste to be like, oh shit, that's particularly good. Or you can be like, okay, I remember once asking something to write a poem, and the
Mhm,
poem was okay,
uh-huh,
like kind of meh. And then I said, okay, now rewrite this as if it was by something else, and put it through something, and it got a lot better.
mhm.
And that's just interesting in terms of I do think it introduces a level of like metacognition. It's like advanced rubber ducking, right? Are you familiar with the concept of
Yeah,
rubber ducking?
yeah, right. No, I mean, yeah,
So
that's really what I use it for. Having it, yeah, like talking to an LLM is more interesting than talking to a rubber duck for sure. It can speak back.
and the cool thing is it challenges you to articulate yourself. So
Yes, yeah, those
you you
also.
you come to a better sometimes even so like you're talking with it because you know it will respond, but
Uh-huh.
like more than half the value I think is not even in the response. It's in
Uh-huh.
figuring out how to ask for what you want, right?
Mhm,
And that's a divide in the users, in some people who like it and some people who don't. Some people just don't know what they want and they don't know how to ask for what they want. And if you're even smart enough to say something like, okay, hey dear LLM, right? I want to figure out something about how to surprise my wife for her birthday or something, but I'm not sure what to do. What do you think I should how should I think about it? So even being able to ask, how should I think about this? And then you receive a bunch of, okay, you could ask this, you could check that, you could try this, and then you're like, I'm gonna go with this. Knowing to ask that first question,
Mhm.
separate like it cleaves people tremendously, right? Because if you it's like I guess you can condense it into knowing how to ask for help, knowing how to ask the bot to help you. Right? If you don't know how to ask for help, then you can't ask for help, and then you can't receive help. And so you get this divergence between the people who know how to ask for help and know how to like do these intermediate steps of I'm not sure, can you do this? Can you try this? What are you capable of? Versus just not.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. One thing that I ran into sometimes when I was like, sometimes I would try to evangelize like an LLM to someone. People always ask very, very specific questions. Someone might be trying to get a job, and they ask ChatGPT like, "How can I improve my resume?" or something, and it's just like, "Oh, well, that's not that useful to me because this and this and this," and I'm just like, "Did you could ask it that," and they're just
Yeah.
like. Oh yeah, I guess I could ask that. But like the loop doesn't really close most of the time. Like most of the time it doesn't then span out to like, oh, I can actually ask it like at a high level about anything to figure out just asking stuff to get to the question you really want to ask. Yeah, like you said, that's
Yeah.
the valuable thing, right?
And
Um
I think people's intuitions are miscalibrated. So
yeah.
people think in terms of, well, I want to ask a friend for help, but
Uh-huh.
I don't want to be annoying and ask 25 questions. But LLMs will never be annoyed at you. So you can
Yeah.
ask, and people don't realize that because they already have built in emotional limits to how many. So it's like if I have to ask 10, like 25 questions to get to the real question, I'll never do that. So I can't get there. So it can't be done. But it can. It's just that there was an assumption that you had, right? People need time to warm up to the idea of like, oh, you can ask. Like, so that's probably I don't know if I would have thought to articulate this before this conversation, but like it would probably be a public service to demonstrate to people that you can just ask indefinite amounts of questions, like even a story, like a short story or whatever,
Well,
where
yeah, that's
someone
kind of what I'm saying. Like, I feel like in a lot of cases, fiction is much more effective at transmitting that sort of message than non-fiction.
yeah,
Because, like, I think there's like a pretty small market for reading essays, to be completely honest, or just like non-fiction long
sure,
form. But like, if you kind of sneak it like into your fiction, into your entertainment as like medicine, sort of, and it just builds up over time, people are like, oh, yeah, I guess I can do that, and I think that's something that's really lacking. I want to change topics a little bit, not too much, but I wanted to like I feel like something that kind of makes us similar is that I would consider myself to be continuously very enchanted by the internet. And I would say the same thing about you, I think. But I think right now we're in this period of very rapid disenchantment with the internet. I think
yeah.
that in the beginning, everyone was pretty, I think in the 90s, even into like 2014 or so, I feel like everyone was pretty enchanted by the internet. But I think that right now, I think that, I think with a project like yours or with like a speculative fiction project to kind of try to imagine different relational technologies, I think first there's the question of imagining. But I also think there's the question of like re-enchanting people with the internet and just technology more broadly, because I think there's a lot of people that have this very dystopian mechanical view of what the internet is, and that's kind of the only thing they can imagine it as,
Yeah.
especially if they were people that only came onto the internet in earnest during COVID, which I think is a lot of people. Like I think people
Yeah.
that are just like have always been online don't really
Right.
realize that there were people that didn't just regularly like go on the internet
Yeah. Yeah.
like until the
Right.
pandemic. And if that was your experience, then yeah, you're not going to have that more romantic internet experience. So I wanted to ask, how do you think that can be accomplished? Like, do you think it's sort of just some people, like for a lot of people, it's just never going to happen, or do you think there is something that can be done?
I would say for some people it's never going to happen, but I think that's it's actually quite a small percentage of people, but it's a very loud group of people. So that Yeah, I mean, stepping back a little bit, this is kind of my main thing right now, I think. So with
Mhm.
my current set of essays that I'm working on, it's called frame studies, and it's basically about this. It's like, how do you not get swept up in like hostile frame or inhospitable frames of in terms of how you see what you're experiencing online and beyond. And I no, so the question of enchantment and re-enchantment and disenchantment, I think it's a good frame. The approach to these things should be very simple, and people over intellectualize it a little bit. Like it's really be enchanted yourself, right? And then just continually express your enchantment in every moment you get. And you don't have to be like, oh, today, 9 o'clock, I'm gonna start, whatever. Like no, like just enjoy what you enjoy, delight in what you delight in, and share your curiosities and questions. And I do that, and it's funny because you'll encounter kind of, I would say, the like burnt cynics, like, so people who come to you and say, oh, this isn't gonna work. People are gonna, like, it's funny, like they get a bit meta about it. Instead of engaging directly with, oh, here's how I feel about it, they come and say, oh, other people are gonna get your ass for this, or they're gonna make fun of you for this or whatever. And I'm like, I don't care what other people think. What do you think? And that itself is a bit of dynamism that takes some practice to get to, because it's very easy to get swept up in someone presents you with a frame like, oh, don't you aren't you worried that other people are gonna be upset? And then the natural kind of people pleasing or following the conversation flow thing is, oh, they ask me a question, I'm going to answer the question. But there are some questions that when people ask you, the polite slash healthy thing to do is to decline the question, which
Mhm.
which and it's funny because the people who are best at declining questions are like narcissists and sociopaths, and they're like, I reject your reality and substitute my own, right? Like that kind of very extreme manipulative kind of thing. But used in like small doses, when you recognize that someone is spiraling, you can get them to, like, you can distract them from their spiraling into, oh, everything's terrible, to be like, hey, I know I saw this cool thing. I thought about this cool thing, and again, like, just as being imaginative can seem frivolous, that same thing where someone's like, oh, there's so much terrible stuff in the world, and you're like, oh, but I like these things. And they're like, well, that's so small-minded of you or whatever. But you, it it takes courage and some discipline and some focus to be like, I don't care. Like, what you're saying is valid. There are bad things that are happening in the world, but like, I don't want my attention to be always held hostage by whatever the worst thing is happening somewhere right now. And like, I was just looking up a C.S. Lewis quote about this yesterday, and he was saying something like, "It seems noble to say that you're not gonna be happy or whatever until everyone is happy, but
Mhm.
at the same time, that allows, I think his quote was, it allows hell to veto heaven, and it allows a dog in the manger to be like the tyrant of the universe, right? Like, just
Mhm.
there's always going to be somebody up, and which isn't to say that you pretend everything is good, right? Like, so
Uh-huh.
there is a skill here that a lot of people haven't cultivated, and it's hard to cultivate. You need mentors, and you need examples of people doing it well, where you protect your peace without denying bad things are happening.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Kind of reminds me of one of my favorite frames of yours, which I think I think it was your idea originally, is the idea of psychofauna.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
which
mine.
is which is imagining certain memetic hazards. I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example, like QAnon, perhaps, and ideas like memes that can kind of infect your brain and cause you to live poorly or be bad to society in some way. Like imagining those as the predators that our ancestors may have faced.
Yeah,
I think this is a really compelling frame. I don't know if I could fully articulate why, but there's something that feels it kind of feels almost like mythical. Like it
yeah.
feels like there's
There are a
something
few
like
layers.
I remember I think your friend Tyler Alterman actually wrote a like
Book,
a
yeah,
speculative fiction book based on this
yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that or just this
I
concept in
haven't I
general?
haven't actually read it yet,
Uh-huh.
but I mean, I like that someone's doing it. It's like, yeah, I kind of see my task as I could try and write a book myself,
Uh-huh.
or I could inspire a dozen other people to write books, and then I have indirectly caused a dozen books. So that's my preference.
Uh-huh.
Unless I have a book that's pulling my hair, asking me to write it. If I think I think like that's the best. Like so, I have written two books, and both of them felt like they were pulling me by the hair to write them. So like otherwise, you're gonna get fucked up. But
Mhm.
yeah, I like that the idea is catching on because so how the term came was I encountered the term egregore several times and I always forgot what it meant and I forgot what the word was and I had to look it up again each time. And it's basically like, oh, larger than human psychic entity, whatever. So I did a tweet that's like, egregore? Oh, you mean the psychic megafauna? And then I said psychic megafauna a few times, and then that just kind of contracted to psychofauna. And yeah,
Uh-huh.
I like the comparison because you know that megafauna took skill to take down. Like it
Yeah.
required like an individual human has no defenses against like 1v1. You can't beat like those giant a saber-toothed tiger 1v1, right? You need tools and ideally you need to be with other people. You need a band of people with tools to take down megafauna. And the same is also true for psychofauna. I think it's like again, as humans, we are wired to enjoy or appreciate collaborative activities of skill.
Uh-huh.
And the concept of here there be psycho just as the fact that our ancestors took down the megafauna completely, sadly, actually. There's a sense of we have this innate drive to not be conquered by these large beasts,
Uh-huh.
and we would like to collaborate to not be defeated. And those are
Mhm.
all good things for people. Like to collaborate is good, survive is good, to flourish is good, and to defeat large dangerous entities also feels good, I think. And so that's part of why I think the idea is very very naturally compelling. Like it fits into the shape of the same. It goes in the square hole, right? It's the same
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, I'm very proud of that coinage, and it makes me wonder really like how many other things exist but have not been described or named. Le Guin
Oh
has this
yeah.
great
So,
quote about like the true name of things, right? And
uh-huh.
yeah, like naming things well invites other people to say things about them that may lead to them being, if not defeated, at least contended with in some way. I
Mhm.
just describe things. Like it's amazing how far we can get in everything by just describing things.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Do you feel like I guess do you feel how satisfied do you feel with the affordances given to you by the current popular social media platforms? Like,
Ah,
do
nah,
you feel like what is there just like a sort of like dream social media platform that you could sketch out for us?
yeah, I've had many versions of this conversation with people, and I had a friend Andrew who had a quote that was, "Social media everywhere is designed for consumption more than it is for connection and creation." So I mean, like creation in the sense of creating content to be consumed, and like selling, and it's usually selling ads. So whatever sells more ads, which means usually getting optimizing for maximum amount of traffic, which usually means optimizing for maximum amount of like emotional resonance in terms of like emotionally arousing, so anger, sadness, frustration, regret, whatever, and horniness, whatever. And so you get very lurid outcomes, right? And yeah, the economics of that is difficult. The thing that I'm always wanting in all my platforms is usually like better follower management, which is not a priority for most platforms because most users don't care. But like the power users should care because curating relationships. So I have like almost 100,000 followers on Twitter, and I have no meaningful way to really like navigate that thing like on the platform itself. Like there are second hand tools you can use, but they're all clunky and I mean I used to say expensive, but now I don't even mind paying for it. It's just that it's just like clunky to use. Like if it was native to Twitter itself, it'd probably be better. Like just sorting your followers by location, by bio, by all this information that they have, but they don't surface because I don't know. It's not interesting to the. It's not worth their resources. I would pay for it, and I would pay Twitter a disturbing amount of money to have root access to my own social graph in terms of who have I interacted with most recently, who have I not, who has, and some other platforms have some of this. Like I think Snapchat has some of it, Instagram has some of it. Like you can sort by most recently interacted with or like least interacted with. Like all that is very important information to me in a sense. And we should have a whole suite of ways to connect with our audiences and with friends. Like which of my friends reply the most. Like I can try and triangulate maybe if AI just gets a bit better, a bit more, I can just ask, tell me AI who are whatever. Maybe hopefully that solves everything.
You can kind
But
of do
yeah,
that on Substack, right? Like if you
sort
click on like if you click on a user, you can tell like which of your posts they've looked at and like what their open rate is and how long
yeah,
they
I
spent
think
on the
that's true.
post.
So Substack,
Yeah,
so long
kind of
form.
creepy.
Yeah, but I think we're coming around to. It's interesting that you say creepy. It's like technologies, all like frontier technologies end up encroaching into people's social norms. So all
Uh,
good technology is creepy in a sense.
uh,
Like it will be creepy. Like when people first started wearing Walkman earphones, that was considered creepy in a way. It's like antisocial behavior, right? To wear headphones in public back then, or like if someone's taking photos, that's creepy. Like at all back then. Like now, we over time we develop social norms. Like don't get right up in someone's face and take the picture of it. Like or like taking a creep shot of a stranger on the subway. Like that's ambiguous. Like in most, it depends on how the photograph is framed. Like do you look like you're intruding on them with the shot, or do you not? And like if there's a fight breaking out, now the rules are you can film it because we need a film of the fight so that we can pass judgment on whether it was whatever, right? So there are all these social rules that emerge organically in response to a technological innovation, which is very interesting to really get into. And I think that there may be different platforms that emerge with different levels of insight into what the users are doing or not doing, and the different creators may prefer different platforms for that. And then people ultimately want to go where the creators are most successful and happy, I think. And so if there's more analytics that makes creators better, I think consumers adapt to it and learn to live with it for the most part. But again, how do you? It's very difficult to predict these things because they can be. Elon removed Twitter likes, and that was a like why did he do it? I don't know, whatever. And like Twitter likes used to be a useful form of information in some ways, but now that there's no more likes, it reveals a different kind of useful information in that people can like things without worrying that someone else will think worse of them for liking it. So we have a more honest counting of what posts are liked, but we lose the ability to scroll through a liked tweet and find potential friends and people who like the same thing. So it's pros and cons, and ultimately up to the whims of the people running the platforms, I guess. And I have conversations with people who are very passionate about like open source type things, but the challenge with platforms is that people typically want to be on the platform where the action is, and they will tolerate a lot of unpleasantness to be where the action is, which is also what people do with cities. A lot of people migrate to cities that are, it's expensive, it's messy, it's noisy, there's a lot of crime or whatever. But like, if the opportunities are high enough and it's exciting enough, like people will make that trade off. Not everyone, but so you want people to sort themselves out to wherever they are comfortable, and I think the same will be true for online platforms, especially since you don't need to. You can multi. What's the word? You can hot swap between multiple platforms simultaneously. So there isn't the think of like, well, maybe I would be happier in New York, but I'm already in California and San Francisco, and like I don't know if I want to move. Where like in online, I have a base here, I have a base there, and I'll see how I feel, and then I slowly adjust accordingly. That's good. There should be more of that, I guess.
Mhm. All right. Well, I think this is a pretty good time to wrap things up. But so normally, what I do at the end of the episode is I ask the person for like a short speculative fiction recommendation of some kind. But especially since we didn't talk about sci-fi as much, I kind of just want to open up the floor to you to plug anything you want to plug, and also just recommend anything you want to recommend.
I do have two friends that come to mind when people ask me about sci-fi, who have written good stories that I like. One is his name is Jordan Chase Young. So his username on X is J A Chase Young. The other is Eliot Pepper, Eliotteper, and these are both very contemporary authors who are like young, very internet centric, very thinking about AI and thinking about you know and very accessible. I feel like so like I do think that there is a thing that happens with authors of all kinds, but people who want to write technical stuff that get very esoteric and very kind of complex. But both Jordan and Elliot, like I feel they write very human stories. Jordan in particular has this really nice short story about like I think one of those like upload your mind to the cloud concept premise, and it's very romantic and sweet and kind of wholesome. And usually you hear like very dystopian visions of that kind of thing, and he described like a very nice story of like I think a husband reuniting with a wife or something like that. And it's just so nice to inhabit the possibility of something kind of warm. Whereas I think Elliot has like a whole bunch of books. I'm still in the middle of one of his, which is like about like semiconductors and geopolitics, and it's just like if I were to shill to an audience that is interested in sci-fi, I would check out Jordan and Elliot, both of them.
Mhm. Okay. Well, you can find Visa on Substack at Visa's
Mhm.
Voltaic Verses or on Twitter at Visakanv, I think,
Yes,
as well as that handle.com, right? That would be
everywhere. Yeah,
your blog.
right.
Um, but yeah, thanks so much for being on the show, and we will see you all next week.
Thank you for having me.